Hello and welcome to the Juan podcast. If you're enjoying the show, consider signing up for the Patreon. There you get ad-free content, early access, exclusive episodes, and monthly supporter hangouts. You can find it at patreon.com/the Juan podcast. If you don't like the subscription-based models, there are other ways of supporting the show that are linked in the description. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy this episode.
They said it was forbidden. They said it was dangerous. They were right. Introducing the paranoid American homunculus owner's manual. Dive into the arcane, into the hidden corners of the occult. This isn't just a comic. It's a hidden tome of supernatural power. All original artwork illustrating the groundbreaking research of Juan Ayala, one of the only living homunculologists of our time. Learn how to summon your own homunculus, an enigma wrapped in the fabric of reality itself, their power at your fingertips, their existence, your secret. Explore the mysteries of the Aristotelian, the spiritual, the Paracelsian, the Crowleyan homunculus, ancient knowledge lost to time, now unearthed in this forbidden tale. This comic book holds truths not meant for the light of day, knowledge that was buried, feared, and shunned. Are you ready to uncover the hidden? The Paranoid American Homunculus Owner's Manual, not for the faint of heart. Available now from Paranoid American. Get your copy at tjojp.com or paranoidamerican.com today.
Welcome to the One-on-One podcast with your host, Juan Ayala.
Welcome back to another episode of the One-on-One podcast. I'm your host. As always, make sure to follow the show on social media at the One-on-One podcast, tjojp.com, patreon.com/the One-on-One podcast, all that good stuff. Wherever you're listening, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, leave a 5-star review. It helps the show out. Share the show with family and friends, all that good stuff. Make sure to get a copy of the Homunculus Owner's Manual, tjojp.com. Everything is on there, done by Paranoid American, Cultus Mundi, comic book, all that stuff. And I am joined today. I want to talk about women in alchemy, something that isn't really covered a lot. And I'm like, if I'm going to talk about women, I might as well have a woman to talk about women in alchemy. So who do I have the pleasure of being joined by today?
It's me. I was going to say me, Juan, because it's One-on-One podcast, but it's Yiskah.
It's Yiskah. How are you?
I'm doing good. I have a lot of stuff here because we've had a lot of time to prepare. So I'm kind of inundated with links and documents and PDFs, but I think we'll be able to go through it and pick out some really good tidbits of information for people to take, and not just information, but I really want this to become a conversation, not just around women in alchemy, but how women are perceived in the modern world for their advancements historically. Mm-hmm. So hopefully we can get to that.
And for those that, because I don't think we've done an episode on my show, at least I think we've done one on Patreon. Where can people find you? You're an astrologer. You do readings. If anyone wants to hit you up, where can people find you? I
actually don't do readings anymore. I'm
really?
A full-time student again. Yeah, I'm a full-time student now. I'm getting paid to go to school. Whoop. Getting paid to study. But you can find me on Instagram and come hang out and talk to me. and kind of follow what I'm doing. I'm working on a lot of different projects right now. I'm just so busy with studying that I'm not putting a lot of things out there, but I do love sitting with people and having conversations, and especially on anything I'm studying. And I am finishing up my double major in anthropology and finance, and the historical, conversation around women is like a big part of my interests in what I'm doing, especially when it comes to, again, just like how we understand women in religion or women even in science, since alchemy was a science of its day and still is somewhat, it's like a spiritual science, how we understand their advancements and their contributions to those fields. There's not, at the risk of sounding a bit cliche, there's not enough conversation around the matter. I know we all hear that all the time, but not enough women in STEM, all this. Like, what about women in alchemy?
Yeah. Yeah, no, 100%. And women in alchemy actually, they contributed a lot. And it's really interesting because one of the first OG alchemists, which I want to kind of take it in a little bit of chronological order. We're going to be jumping around a little bit. We might dive deeper into one person and then the others, but I want to start at the beginning. And Zosimos actually referred to Mary the Jewess, which was one of the early OG alchemists. And I came across this while reading Jay Widener and Vincent Bridges' The Mysteries of the Great Cross of Hendai, where they talk about that Mary phenomenon with Jesus and how there were so many Marys, and then the first ones that found Jesus were the Marys. And it's like, I'm not insinuating that they were practicing any necromancy or anything of that nature, but I'm just saying there's been that sort of look upon women throughout history as well, right? Like they're witches. And I don't really find the Salem witch trials like all that interesting. And I did an episode not too long ago on familiars where it kind of sort of linked to that phenomenon of the Salem witch trials and all that, because it's like if an old lady in the woods that was alone because, you know, she was a widow and she had a pet frog, well, that was actually her demonic familiar, therefore they freaking burned her at the stake because she had a pet frog or a pet whatever, a pet raccoon, whatever you want to call it. So it's like there's that connection there of like these demonic animals that are linked right there, the witch's familiar. And so women have always been, like throughout history, they've been that stigma of, oh, they're going to the black mass, right? Like where do women slip off in the middle of the night to go hang out with their lady friends in the wood? Like there's movies on that, isn't there? There's like whole shows on.
There probably are. I mean, we probably just go out to like, I don't know, most women that I've seen, at least in the suburbs, what do? They go out to like Chili's for mom's night out or something.
Hanging out with Baphomet at Chili's.
Bottomless mimosas, like at the brunch.
So I mean, throughout history,
that is an interesting point, though. Mm-hmm. That's I want to stick with that. That's really interesting because there is this, there's a lot of pop culture on things. Like there's that whole book, right, that came out. It was called The Red Tent. And it was about, and it's about like a place where women went during their menstrual cycle because, like in Judaism, for instance, it was seen as like unclean, and it kind of romanticized this idea. And I mean, you could kind of see it in a way as like women kind of got a couple of days off, which is a whole current conversation around should women be getting time off, PTO, like sick days for their menstrual cycle, which a lot of doctors have come out and have said, like, these can be as painful as heart attacks, and they can be, and especially for women who have complications like I do, a lot of like, autoimmune conditions and problems. There are days of the month where I'm done. It's not like, oh, it's PMS, it's a physical ailment to some extent. It's not always, if you're healthy, some women go through it, just do fine. But it's become romanticized. It's become like pop culture-sized with books. But that idea of like where women are going. And that is the thing that when I was doing this research became really interesting, because you said go in chronological order, and I kind of laughed because I wrote down all the names of the women that I could find in alchemy chronologically, because I was like, I want to get this all together. There was one woman I found, and while doing the research and reading about her, and I think this was, let me see here, this was during the 1500s, and we'll get into, I'm not even going to bring up her name right now, but during the time, this woman had an interest in alchemy, and she, you know, had the funds to kind of procure some laboratory equipment and whatnot. But during that time in the 1500s, alchemy was not seen as suitable for women to study because women were too passionate and they fell into too much excess when studying something. So there was this idea that like women being off on their own without the guidance of a man was almost like letting your children run amok, because women to some extent, they were treated like children. I mean, they were property. They didn't have any rights. And so, I mean, that goes into the whole conversation around women in alchemy. And it, like, again, you know, some people might just take this as, well, let's just talk about, you know, I don't know, what's that buzz motto or something on YouTube, like 10 women in alchemy, you know, like, let's talk about this list of people. But it brings up a really interesting conversation around the fact that you hear a lot of, not a lot, I think it's like a loud minority. There is the whole, like, you know, red pill, alpha male, traditionalist Western, like, conversation around, well, white Western men are the ones who, like, you know, brought us all this amazing cultural stuff. And women, you know, they're just not capable of what men are capable of. But the thing that I found through doing this research, the thing I found through doing this research is that women are equal to men intellectually. We're not equal physically and, you know, in a lot of different ways, but intellectually we are. And the reason why you don't see as many female names in certain, you know, achievements, you do see some. The reason why you don't see as many is because there was no means of research. There was no means of monetary funds. There was, sometimes you were just barred entry by the society you lived in. And the thing with the Marys is even interesting. You know, like Mary comes and finds Jesus, Yeshua at the tomb, and then the men come later, but all the women kind of take a back seat. But all the dudes who ran off when he was on the cross, they're like, they were all afraid, you know, except for John. Shout out John, you know, he wasn't scared, but
shout out to Judas.
It's really
too, right?
interesting. But yeah, but it's just like, there's this whole, it's a very interesting dichotomy there. And I mean, you have to understand, like, you know, if we're talking about the New Testament, this is written, this is going on in like a Jewish culture where you had to have more female witnesses than male witnesses for the court.
Really?
Because I guess, you know, you couldn't trust women as much. And I mean, it all comes from a lot, and it's very interesting. It's something, like I said, it's been on my mind. I've taken a couple classes, I've written about it. I'm not by any means, you know, like a hyper feminist or anything like that. But yeah, but I do think that there is a lot to be said that's not being talked about. And if we go back historically and can understand these things in context, we could actually, it's kind of interesting. We can make a lot of changes in our day-to-day life of how we look at each other, and also how women look at men too. So this is a really interesting conversation, because it's not just about history. It actually does blend into the topic of now, the present, especially when it comes to a spiritual path. Because, like you said, Mary the Jewess, and of course, like, Mary is kind of the Jennifer of the Jewish names. It's just everybody's name is Mary. Yeah, she was one of the first people in Panopolis wrote about, Zosimus, of Panopolis wrote about her. So I think his book was 4th century AD.
And he said she was around. And he was, Zosimos' work is the oldest literature we have in relation to alchemy, one of the oldest. So he was referencing her work. So she had to have come before him.
Yeah, he was saying she's like 3 centuries earlier. She's 1st century AD.
Wow.
So, you know, the height of Rome, the height of Alexandria, all of these things. And he wrote a book on, I was writing down here, on furnaces and apparatuses. And his book is more than likely believed to be based on a text that Mary herself wrote. Kind of like he did a Cliff Notes version of it.
Yeah.
And he wrote about her in his book, The Coloring of Precious Stones, as well. But she was one of the first people, as he's referencing her, to see alchemy as a reproduction, almost, that there are certain genders of metals and substances. And when you join those two materials together of different genders, you create something new. So this conception of substances, so to speak. But yeah, she also observed the oxidation process of metals. She was I don't know if she was the first, but the first recorded as far as he goes of hypothesizing that there could be this process of turning base metals into gold. She also invented a device that was used to heat substances, collect their vapors, kind of like a distillation device. And German man modified that design and actually created something called the Soxhel extractor that is still used in chemistry today. So, and she also created, she came up and designed these alembics and, distillation devices. And these are her designs. And it's definitely pretty much like set in stone that this person was real, because you have a man writing about this and going, this is from a woman. You wouldn't usually see that unless it was legit. Most men wouldn't do that back then, especially like a woman. What? But yeah, so she was like the OG essentially. I don't know. I couldn't really find much on, it was 1st century AD, so it would be really rare. And even Zosimus's writings are copies of copies, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're maybe the things written by him. The oldest copy we have is written in the 1500s, 1600s, maybe. So as far as I know, there are no extant writings of hers, but they are so old, and they probably burned up in that fire in the library of Alexandria.
I think there was fragments. I'll look for it here, and I wanted to read something because we're talking about Zosimos, who was also a Gnostic. They were Hermeticists, and I wanted to read here that there's a chapter on chapter 3 of this book, The Mysteries of the Great Cross of Hendai, the Gnostic Eschatology, the Gnostic Return of Isis, and Mary the Alchemist. And in what is perhaps our earliest alchemical text, called Isis the Prophetess, we find a glimpse of an ancient science. At the core of this science is something we can recognize as alchemy. So remember, alchemy existed. It wasn't called alchemy until Zosimos came out with it. It started to develop, chem coming from Egypt, the black sands, etc., which emerged from the intellectual and spiritual ferment of Alexandria in the first 3 centuries of the modern era. As it developed, it became part of the spiritual tradition of Gnostic, as opposed to Orthodox and Apostolic Christianity. Hopefully I'm saying that right. And he goes on to say here, because this is something that I've been noticing, and something that we'll get to with Mary Anne Atwood, where she's got an interesting story, but it revolves around light. And something that I was just reading here, because supposedly how the lure goes, and I've said it before on the podcast, is in alchemy, when you achieve the magnum opus, when you are able to transmute and project the base metals into gold, which is a byproduct of this process, the light from that process gets infused in your DNA and changes your genetic structure, and you become this, what they call a homo luminous light being. And in here it says, as each soul is redeemed. So according to the Gnostic myth, at the creation of the world, the spirit of light was imprisoned by the powers of darkness. This light, the essence of God, was trapped in human bodies as separate sparks of light, our souls. Gnostic sects held that the goal of human existence was to travel the path of return, the journey of the individual sparks back to the union with the original light through the process of redemption. So the Gnostics, they believed through gnosis, which is knowledge, you could transcend the eons and go back, and be reunited with the source, the one. They were emanationists, so from the source radiated outwards reality. So you have the upper eons, which is metaphysical, then you have the lower eons, which are the more physical, mundane world ruled by the demiurge. So they want to go back there, which is essentially it's the same thing as regular mainstream Christianity. Pick one of the 44,000 denominations, I'm sure that they got it all figured out, but essentially you're a good person, you're able to go to heaven. That's the core of it. You need to believe and accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior, and through that you will be redeemed and you will be able to move on to this other dimension, essentially, So according to the Gnostics, this world and its history are the works of the evil demiurge. This is the false god, or the evil one, who built this world as a trap for souls, or the light. Now, this is where it gets very heretical, very controversial, because when you tell people that the Satan or devil archetype built our universe and our world, and he is imprisoning us in this false matrix of some sort, that can really, I mean, I got called a Satan worshiper. This is like the first stuff that I ever got into when I was diving into the esoteric and the occult. It was with the Gnostics.
People don't like Gnostics. I
No.
don't not like Gnostics. I do. I feel like Gnosticism is kind of the antithesis to shamanism, which sees the physical world as a external expression of spirituality. I lean more towards that understanding, but there is a lot to the Gnostic idea, because the Gnostic idea, you know, like you say, it's coming out of apostolic Christianity. But what we see as Christianity today is not. I mean, it wasn't even called Christianity. It was called the Way. It was very Jewish. It was very. It wasn't particularly Jewish, because you had later on people saying you don't have to follow the laws and all that. But what we have is Christianity today is very much based on, you know, like the Roman pantheon, because it came out of the Roman Catholic Church, which is, you know, just a replacing of the Roman pantheon of gods. Gnosticism is really interesting because it's a lot of people, well, it came out of Christianity. It's like a Christian sect, but it's not. It comes from something older. And there's kind of two. Yeah. And there's two divisions where it kind of goes off. You have the Gnostic division, and the Gnostic division kind of goes into the Roman Catholic, but then the Roman Catholics, they have the Council of Nicaea, I think, with St. Nicholas there, and he ends up punching some Gnostic guy, and, you know, they're all fighting and killing each other. And then you have the Essene kind of sect, which is an older Jewish sect.
They're more mystical.
Kind of goes off, and and they're almost completely wiped out by Inquisitions that follow, because there wasn't just the Spanish Inquisition. There were many Inquisitions. Yeah. And, you know, I mean, that's why, like, people are like, whoa, why are there, you know, there are Jewish people all over. There were Jewish people in India that have been there since the 1st century AD, when the Roman Second Temple went to Europe, went here and there, because they were persecuted by the Catholics. Like, they were forced to convert or whatever. And so, and also the Eastern Orthodox. But with the Gnostic kind of idea, and this is interesting what you said about, you know, when you get to the gold, a lot of people misunderstand alchemy as they just wanted to turn metal into gold. And that sounds awesome. And personally, I'm kind of just a very simple person. And if I could do that, I would stop there too. We don't need spiritual attainment. We just found out how to turn lead into gold. We're good. I'm happy with that. But maybe gold prices are down, but, you know, when they go back up. But alchemy was not just, I want to turn lead into gold because I want to become rich. It really was a spiritual understanding of things. And it was this understanding that nature in itself was like very simple, and that nature really consisted of things that it was almost like atomism from the Greeks, but not quite atomism, that nature consisted at its core. Everything had a perfect form and structure. And for the ancient alchemists and for the ancient world entirely, and there are so many theories about this, like some people like, what do they call them? The Anunnaki, the Sumerians, who like supposedly like aliens who created people or something. They loved gold, right? People loved gold. Gold was this mystical, I mean, it still is. I mean, at the end of the day, how much gold you hold is like, I like that rhymed. How much gold you hold is like really important for your currency, for your nation's GDP. I mean, getting into finance here, we don't have a lot. China's buying it all up. Our dollar's going down in value. I mean, it has no value at this point, but gold was very important even back then. Gold has a lot of functions. It has a lot of functions in computers, you know, like in hardware, not software, has a lot of functions in the scientific realm as well. So this idea of like, why would they want gold? It wasn't just about it being expensive and making you rich. It was really about this is a symbol for something, but also to the effect that people saw gold as having spiritual and physical properties that could give you powers. And so if you could find the key, because the idea was that within base things, they had a seed of the truth of it. And it's very Platonic, you know, like Platonism. This is the idea that what makes a chair isn't that it's made out of wood and it has a shape. It's the fact that you see it as a chair. So a stump could become a chair. It's this actually it's more Aristotelian, but it's this the philosophy of it. Yeah, that you put that form onto it. And gold it's almost like a thing in of itself. It is the seed of everything that is holy. And I guess from a Gnostic point of view would be the little bit of divinity that's left in that disgusting physical thing. That there was a little bit of divinity left, and if you could just pull it out, you could turn that metal into gold, because everything had it. Just like you said, if you could get that divine essence, and if you could find out how to get that out of a piece of lead or do it with some kind of other metal, then surely you could do it from the human self as well, that there was some kind of inner animation.
They believe that everything consisted of like this prima materia. So therefore, if everything consists of that,
that's the word, Latin.
you can break it back down to that, and then you can reform it into something else. Therefore, you could take base metals, and they believe that they were at different stages of evolution throughout their life, and they could just project it to gold. And so they continue here with this is a false world, demiurge. As each soul is redeemed, it travels back to the source of divine light, which slowly, as more and more souls return to it, become whole again. Eventually, when all souls have returned, the physical universe, being now completely without light, will end. And that's very alchemical, because it's about ending one dimension, destroying one dimension, as you're getting out of it and building another dimension. That's a whole different thing, though. But so, and given modern biology's understanding of the light emitting and information carrying ability of DNA, and such a system's implication for the kind of holographic reality described by the Gnostics, such an eschatology of light gains a new and more scientific meaning. In this sense, we can think of DNA as the small fragments of the hologram, containing the information of the whole, but constrained by matter, which it must animate in order to return to the great light. Therefore, this eschatology of light, synthesized from Egyptian, Persian, and Hebrew elements, can be seen as the framework supporting a variety of Gnostic traditions. These traditions included the new messianic form of Judaism that became Christianity. Indeed, the Gnostic sects quite naturally believed that they possessed the true meaning of Christ's teaching. Most of them did not believe in a literal Jesus born of flesh and blood that suffered and died. To the Gnostics, Jesus was a divine messenger, an angelic being disguised as a man. And again, that's very heretical as well. He was sent he was sent
not invited to the church barbecue anymore.
We're gonna have a couple angry comments, but that's fine. So again, for the sake of conversation, hear me out. He was sent to reveal the secret knowledge of the path of return, the way out of this world of darkness. In this view, Christ's return will not be physical, but spiritual. The resurrection becomes a metaphor for the experience of a spiritual triumph over death, and therefore available to everyone. The Gnostic instance on a direct experience of salvation, a personal return to the light, contrasted sharply with the emerging Orthodox position that held that only the apostles to whom Jesus appeared after the resurrection could hold and transmit spiritual authority. So this is where it gets interesting, because this is where the Marys start to come in. The Gnostics raised the ante, so to speak, by adopting Mary Magdalene as a kind of super apostle. In the Gnostics' view, Mary Magdalene, the sister of Martha and Lazarus, was Jesus' wife. She was also the first witness of the resurrection. The Gnostics also thought that of Mary Magdalene as a source of the secret mysteries. Many of the Gnostic sects held that Mary, mother, wife, and sister of God-man, was simply Isis, the Queen of Heaven. In the mystery of the cathedrals, Fulcanelli draws our attention to this point when he informs us in no uncertain terms that the black Madonnas in the crypts of the great Gothic cathedrals are representations of the goddess Isis, etc., etc. So then it gets here. We have... So essentially they thought that Mary Magdalene had taught Jesus the secrets of the mystery schools, this particular Mary. So
that she was kind of an incarnation or a what's the word?
Well, she was initiated into the mystery.
Well, harbinger of the Sophia, the wisdom is kind of how they saw her. The Sophia of wisdom.
Yeah.
But I mean the word for that, I think the term for it in at least, the Catholic catechism, the official heretical word for it is called a Docetism, which means that people who believed that Jesus didn't have a physical body.
Oh, yes.
That's what it's the heresy that it's called. God forbid you believe that. You'll burn at the stake or get punched by St. Nicholas because he punched a dude for saying that or something else, which is hilarious. I mean, that whole situation, but it's it's interesting to me that it seems like in the Gnostic tradition, I could be wrong because I haven't done a lot of study on the Gnostics, that they didn't, I don't know what their view on like gender was, what their view on women was specifically, but they were one of the groups to have either, depending on who you talk to, they either forged what's the Gospel of Mary Magdalene or the I don't remember the name of exactly, but what was written by her apparent, supposedly, they either forged it or they protected it and saved it and passed it down. So it just depends on who you talk to historically. There's a lot of, was this really written by her? Did the Gnostics make this up? But they seem to be the only ones who are really going, no, like she legit had some things to say. And that's always really interesting to me, coming out of the Roman Empire, which was, I mean, you know, the funny thing is that they kind of went forward and then back, but Christianity actually brought a lot of good changes to the Roman Empire in terms of women's standing, that women were getting more rights to their children and the right not to be, you know, murdered by their husband legally. You know, and that's the reason why a lot of Romans didn't like Christianity, but also in Rome, you didn't have faith in the gods. You just knew they existed, and their approval of you was very important for your conquest. And, you know, the Romans, they were all about conquering other places and being successful in that, especially Britannia. So the biggest reason for the Romans not liking Christianity was that they're like, if we offend the gods, we are screwed. We will not be able to conquer anything else. And so, you know, we have to pay them homage. But it is interesting that the Gnostics did, you know, I didn't even think about that. They did have these books that they said, you know, these are the teachings of Mary Magdalene, and she was, you know, connected to Christ in like a really deep way, and that she had a lot of things to say, and she brought those mysteries forward, which is so strange for the time period. Just anybody saying that was just very weird, because it wasn't going on. Now, if you go back a couple thousand years to ancient Egypt, women had a lot of rights in ancient Egypt, and women had the right to property. I mean, it was kind of like the rights that women have today, pretty much. But we don't have a lot of we don't have a lot of philosophy from them. A lot of people say the ancient Egyptians didn't do philosophy. I think that's not true, because most philosophers, proto-philosophers, even proto-Socratic people, will say everything I learned from ancient Egypt. I think the Egyptians just, that's a whole other situation, but they were just like so inundated with what they believe that I think that they just thought that writing it down would kind of be sacrilegious to do so. And so they just wrote down their magical formulas. But I mean, a lot of these ideas are coming from ancient Egypt. So this idea of like Isis, you know, do I think that the man Yeshua existed? Do I think that he was a historical figure? Yeah, I think there's enough. I don't believe the whole like Constantine made him up thing. I think there is definitely enough historical information and to show us that he existed. So if anybody believes Socrates existed, then you kind of have to assume that Jesus existed, because I mean, there's so much historically backing him up. But as far as what he was or who he was or what he came here to say, that's a matter of people having to make their own decisions based on, you know, what they read historically or what they believe faith-wise. But I think that at the end of the day, every essence of spirituality goes back to some fundamental truth. And so there's definitely always going to be a hint of what you see in Egypt, which is kind of the seat of mysticism and the seat of religion, really, for us. Now, some people say the Egyptians said they got their understanding from an even older civilization. So if you want to go more mainstream and say Egypt and Samaria were the first real civilizations, you could do that. Or you could say they got it from somewhere else. But in the modern world today that we live in, most of what we get mystically and spiritually, unless you're looking into shamanism, animism, and those things, is coming from ancient Egypt. And it's really informed by those myths, which myths aren't religion and they're not philosophy. They're like a blending of the two. Myths are stories that teach us something. And it's not that they're necessarily true, but it's not that they're necessarily false either. They have like a deeper truth to them. And so I love ancient Egypt. I love studying it. I love studying the mysticism of it, because it's like, I don't know, there's something about humans, they're just so drawn to it. I think it's because there is a lot fundamentally there within ancient Egypt that comes out. So seeing like Isis and Mary and Christ and, all these things. Like, some people take it too far, I think, and they're like, well, Jesus never existed. It's just this made up story. And I'm like, nobody knows if Isis existed either, dude, but there is always a hint of that, because we're talking about spirituality here. We're talking about mysticism.
Yeah.
Of course, it's going to sound something like the mysticism that all of our society is based on. I mean, Rome, Greece, they came out of Egypt. So it's really interesting that they had that belief. I didn't know what that far back.
Here it says, as with the mysteries of Isis, early Christianity and alchemy were dominated by women. The most important of the early female alchemists was Cleopatra, author of the text Chrysopia, I think that's how you say it, or gold making. And this is Chrysopia. So, or gold making. And this work collected with the Isis, the prophetess story in the 11th century Codex Marcianus, we find the earliest image of the Ouroboros. So this is the earliest image of the Ouroboros. So the serpent biting its own tail. This symbol of the cosmic cycle is half black and white and encloses a Greek phrase that says the sum of all philosophy. So according to history, if you want to believe it, Cleopatra the Alchemist, not Cleopatra the what was she, a queen or something like that? The ruler.
Pharaoh.
She was a pharaoh.
But
so
Greek Egyptian. So
Cleopatra, she was the first to come up with this Ouroboros, which is, can be seen throughout a lot of religions, and it's especially dominant in alchemy. And these were also some of the other drawings in that Chrysopia.
Yeah, those are that's the one. There's her I don't know what you call them, lithographs or carvings that they had and drawings of hers, and nobody's quite sure what they mean. That's kind of the beauty of it. Nobody, there's always going to be disagreement in the academic field about what it means. But it's, if you get it like deeper into alchemy and into symbolism, especially like sacred geometry, you're like, oh, she was onto something here. This is really interesting. And this is just what survived. So imagine what existed that we don't have access to anymore. That's what blows my mind. Whenever you find these amazing books or these amazing carvings or these, things, that's just what survived. Mm-hmm. There was probably hundreds more that we don't have. And we don't know if we'll ever have them. And so we just have this little snippet of something, and it's already so, you could almost spend, definitely know historians who do spend a lifetime just studying, two of them maybe, and write tons of articles that nobody ever reads except to cite them in their book pretty much. But this is the depth of it. And this is just one female alchemist.
So there's
just one.
They have an interpretation of what this could possibly mean, which is an interesting interpretation. So indeed, given what we know of the importance of DNA and this theology of light, and light, keep in mind, light is what I think is at the core of a lot of these like occult, the esoteric of the esoteric. I think it revolves around light, and we'll get to that in a little bit, right? Because you have the Illuminati, right? Los Alumbrados. So you have all this thing that's related to light, to achieving this sort of light. Now, if it's metaphysical or physical, we don't know. But so in this theology of light, the serpent biting its own tail is a powerful metaphor, a symbolic image of DNA that, according to the anthropologist Jeremy Narby, is produced by the forest television flow of images coming from the DNA itself. On the same manuscript page in the Codex Marcianus, under a serpent-like crescent moon, we find, we find a line of 8 rayed stars. This image of the star is similar to the Gnostic Ogdoad, a grouping of the celestial forces. The Egyptian netters in an 18-fold pattern, reminiscent of both the Ogdoad of Hermopolis, the city of the god Thoth, or Tehuti, and the Gnostic system of Basilides and Valentinus. The 8-rayed star would also become a special symbol of Mary, the mother of Jesus. To the Pythagoreans, it symbolized the regeneration of the cosmos, being as Erathos, I can't even say that name,
It's all Greek to me.
Yeah, whatever. Declared that the double polarity of the elements producing a stability. The 17th century alchemist Basil Valentine, claimed that the 8-rayed star symbolized the philosophical Mercury and the completion of the first stage of the great work. And it's interesting because you have Basil Valentine, who talked about, never mind, I'm thinking about the wrong alchemist. Nicholas Flamel talked about how his wife actually learned how to do the projection, the great work as well, and that she could do it just as well as he could, right? So you have, again, this and another involvement of women in the alchemical work, with Nicholas Flamel being one of the more notable alchemists because he was allegedly funded numerous hospitals and philanthropy and like gave back to the community from this alchemical secret that they had supposedly figured out. Him and his wife both were in it together. So I think what I'm thinking is maybe the woman is needed in this alchemical working, right? Like and not even if it's not a woman, at least a feminine side of, right? So you have the sun and the moon, and then from the union of the sun and the moon, you get that child, right? The homunculus or whatever you want to call it.
And women have, womb. So there is that. I mean, to alchemists already, that's just like, and I mean, of course, like a lot of people in the historical world, I think it was a lot of the Greeks thought that women just held a baby and that the baby came from the man. They didn't know about eggs. Actually, you really need a woman for a lot of it. But a lot of people, like you're talking about the DNA, and even when you went to the Gnostics, and I missed this point, but you were talking about holographic, and it's interesting because
this kind of looks like a DNA strand, like it's like turning around on itself. It's kind of,
the ancient Egyptians knew about atoms. They knew that matter was composed of small particles that vibrated, that moved. They didn't have any, as far as we know, they didn't have any tools or apparatuses to detect this, but they came up with that idea philosophically to the point where it became kind of common knowledge. And people said, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So what's interesting is that when you look back at a lot of these myths and these writings, and I'm going to say myths, but really philosophical writings is what they are. People call them myths, but they're really a type of philosophy, not, your contemporary Western philosophy, but they're a type of philosophy, is that in a type of science, just not how we understand it today. They were already getting to the point of, they understood that, they understood atomism. A lot of them seem to have understood the structure of DNA, which is just mind-blowing. If they didn't have apparatuses to see it, how they figured that out? Well, I guess if you can, it's a part of your body, so if you can go into like your consciousness deep enough, maybe you can detect that stuff somehow. But also that this holographic universe idea, and this is not simulation theory. This is not Elon Musk. We live in a video game played by some god alien. Holographic theory is very Platonic in forms, but it is one of the best theories to explain at this point, from the information that we have so far, how our universe and our world and our realm that we live in is composed. Is that there is everything you see here around you, and my half and half tea from Bacchus, my vape and all this is just a projection of something deeper than it. It's just a projection, like a holograph.
It's an emanation of the
light.
source. Yeah.
An emanation of the source, exactly. And we're understanding that literally is what we live in. And these people figured that out thousands of years ago. And then we lost it. Now we kind of came back and got it. But the way that we rediscovered this information was a very different way. We quote unquote rediscovered it through what we would call the scientific method now,
which is
very much, in a way it is really. And I mean, isn't that like Asimov always said, you wouldn't know the difference between magic and like really advanced technologies, but it really isn't even magic though. It's just it's materialist reductionism. It is everything is a machine, and it can be understood by ripping it apart. And there was a way we could have went historically. We went to that materialist reductionist. We went to that kind of Newtonian way. Mm-hmm. But if you go back in history, oh yeah, big into it. I think actually like later on his writings were like kind of like my physics work sucks in relation to this alchemy work I'm doing that's way more important and way more insightful.
Check this transmutation.
But then people are like, yeah, but people are like, oh, he's crazy. Now don't listen to him. Yeah, but when he discovered gravity, I guess we all flew before.
Check out my new homunculus.
too bad Isaac Newton discovered gravity. I'd be flying right now if he didn't. But the thing is like there was Goethe who was writing, who had a theory of not contemporary, but he had a theory of colors. And Goethe was, the Faust, and he had this theory of colors that kind of went aside Newton's ideas. And it's two theories. They're both sound. It just depends on which one makes most sense to you. But we don't teach Goethe because we went the Newtonian way with,
because Goethe was writing about making homunculus and doing making deals with the devil too. Yeah, Faust for sure. But there's something called Goethean science, which is this can understand the physical world without having to pick the flower and dissect it. We can understand it by sitting with, instead of dissecting a frog, go to where a frog lives, see it in its natural habitat, understand how the frog is without having to deconstruct it, which is something that like the typical,
which is modern science,
which is like the typical YouTube commenter, like they want to dissect everything that you said or whatever, like they want us like, no, I can understand how to use a toilet. I can use a toilet. Now I'm not a plumber, right? That's the more esoteric occult side of it. It's like the plumber went and was initiated in the secret mystery schools of plumbery to learn to be able to pick apart and dissect that toilet and be able to break it down into its prima materia.
It really is a cult. Okay, we put a sink in, and it took us 3 months to get that shit right. So it really is a cult, man. I'm telling you, hats off to plumbers, because I know some millionaire plumbers. Like for real. Like I'm like, why am I getting into finance? I should just be a plumber.
Electrician, which is kind of pretty much up there. That's interesting though.
That's like the Magus right there. If you're a plumber and electrician, you've ascended to the higher realm.
You become the
and
Homo
an
luminous.
HVAC specialist. He is the trifecta of all understanding. But that's the interesting thing, is that they understood a lot about how the world is working. The thing is it's just how we get information. Like right now you have, what's the big thing? Neuralink, right? Which it's either one of two. Either Elon Musk really wants to control us all by putting chips in our brains, and like we can I can play Fortnite in my brain, or it's just a gimmick, like his electric vehicle that's self-driving that didn't exist, and that's why the FCC Trade Commission suing him, because it's false advertisement to tell people that they'll get a fully self-driving car that isn't fully self-driving. This is the more British way of saying it. It's like the way I spell color, COLUOR, and I also say aluminium foil. So I grew up in a strange family.
It's fine. I was saying Goethe goeth, and people were making fun of me. I was getting emails about it.
Shouldn't. Aluminium foil is legit. There are millions of people that pronounce it that way, and But I grew up in a
Alchemy. That's what I'm going to call it.
Alchemy.
So,
but no, it's this idea of it's a very, I don't want to say masculine, because I don't like to pit the genders and the sexes against each other, but it is to some extent a very like masculine kind of like deconstructionist, like reductionist, let's tear it apart, like little boys. I don't know if you have boys, right? Like let's tear their toys apart, kind of thing. And the feminine is more, I have 2 girls and a boy, so I'm like, but like, the feminine is more, let's understand it. Yeah. And I don't want to put that exactly on people. Some people have more, they're more feminine men. That's fine. But it is this understanding. So alchemy is going back and saying, no. Like, now I don't know. You could explain this to me. Did alchemists believe that in a piece of lead, for instance, it had feminine and masculine properties, or were certain metals gendered? Like lead is male, this is female. How did they do that exactly?
Yeah.
Did they have it?
And that's why astrology plays a role in alchemy, because each metal had its gender. Some was more masculine, and this is depicted. So silver, moon, is the feminine, right? Gold, soul, sun is the masculine. So you have these two. You do have the gendering, I guess, if you want to call it, of these metals, and they would also align it to certain astrological alignments. So you were to do this work during a waxing moon, or whatever it was. So it's like you have a whole bunch of different forces at work. And this is where all these alchemical plates come into work, where you have paintings of, right, the sun and the moon. The sun is a man, the moon is a woman, right? The Mercury is Mercury. You have other depictions of there's a whole bunch of different depictions, but you get my point. There is absolutely, they do give the masculine and feminine, which is important. And
there were no transgender metals.
Yeah, so the
They were
divine,
hermaphroditic, they call
yeah, the divine androgen, which is like the one of the magnum opus, I guess, and one of the what you strive for too as well. And you have the hermaphrodite, so that is also part of the alchemical workings. Let me finish up here this Mary thing because it gets, I'm almost here to the end, but this is really interesting here because, so again, for the sake of conversation, I believe in Jesus Christ. I have accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior, and I was saved a very long time ago. I'm just a scholar and I study these things. Like, I have to say that, or else I'll get emails and comments about how this is blasphemous. I understand it's blasphemous, but the New Testament is filled with Marys, which cause considerable confusion. There is Mary, Jesus' mother, and Mary, sister of Martha and Lazarus, and the first witness of the resurrection, and Mary Magdalene, the woman at the well, and so on. Some of these Marys may in fact be the same person. As in the case of Mary of Bethany and Mary Magdalene, the Gnostics avoided the confusion by focusing on Mary Magdalene as the wife and closest confidant of Jesus. Now, this is what you were saying earlier about the Nag Hammadi. According to the Gospel of Mary, one of the Nag Hammadi texts discovered in 1947, Jesus taught her secrets that he failed to reveal to his apostles. Interestingly enough, several Gnostic sects, such as the Ophites, which also so the Ophites held that Mary Magdalene and the noted first century alchemical author known as Mary the Jewess were one and the same individual. And this is interesting because the Ophites also, I believe it's the Ophites, believe that there was like more than 50 Gnostic sects, by the way. The Ophites believe that the serpent, they worship the serpent. So that's how you get the serpent on the cross sometimes in like Freemasonry. So they worship the serpent, and they thought that the serpent was actually the holder of wisdom, the bringer of light, etc., be as wise as serpents. So there's that interesting aspect of it. I've talked about that before. And so whoever she was, Mary the Jewess was an accomplished practical alchemist and the inventor of a series of technical devices still in use today. So because of this Mary the Jewess, we have distillation. So we have beer and all these different things because of this allegedly Mary
whiskey.
Whiskey, yes, exactly.
And essential oils.
Yes.
Essential oils. Although we know that the ancient Egyptians had oils. I don't know if they were essential oils, but what we understand as essential oils today is distillation process for sure.
So we have these devices still in use today, such as the hot ash box for steady heat, the dung box for prolonged heat, and the double boiler, which the French still call a bain-marie. None of her writings have survived, but Zosimos and other early compilers of alchemical texts quote her with the utmost respect. Zosimos considered her to be Miriam, the sister of Moses, which Moses allegedly was one of the greatest alchemists of all time. He was, of course, as always, going for the most ancient tradition. It seems strange at first to think of Mary Magdalene as one of the founders of alchemy. Orthodox Christianity eventually became the only Christianity, obscuring much of the truth about the flowering of competing strains of Christianity in the first century behind the effluence, however, etc., etc. So maybe this is why they've occulted, right, the feminine aspect in the Trinity, right? So, because a lot of people say that the Holy Spirit is feminine in nature. So you have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The Gnostics believed there was the Mother, Father, and the Christos, the Son, right, the child. So maybe this was done on purpose to occult this. Again, just thinking outside the box. I'm not saying it's the truth, but it's interesting nonetheless to talk about because, again, this is history. This is an actual thing, and this even gets into like the Da Vinci Code, where Mary Magdalene and Jesus had children, and you have the whole Merovingian mythos and all that lineage, right? The Holy Grail and all that stems from these Gnostic ideas. So very, very interesting. And I wanted to move on. So we have Mary the Jewess, we have Cleopatra, and I want to jump to, so let's jump to, who do you have in between there? Because we can jump to Sforza if you want.
In between them, I have Hypatia
Hypatia
of Alexandria. So Hypatia, the female polymath genius, literal genius. She actually invented the hydrometer. And she was interested in alchemy. She wasn't what you would consider, you might not consider historically an alchemist.
She was doing experiments.
Yes, and she did correspond with Synesius of Cyrene, the bishop, who was an alchemical author, on a work of alchemy commentary on Pseudo-Democritus and his alchemical writings on dyeing of metals, stones, and wool from ancient Greece. So she did correspond with him on a commentary, like her ideas, and had some things to say. So she was definitely, I mean, we don't, like I said, it's just what we have existing of her writing, right? It's so old. I mean, talking about 300 to 400 AD, we don't have that much. So she probably did write a lot of alchemical things that we just don't have access to. But as far as we know, she was corresponding with Synesius of Cyrene, who was a Greek bishop and alchemical author. And that's like, he's like a whole other thing. So
And
she was corresponding with him. She was there writing with him, giving him ideas.
supposedly she constructed astrolabes too, according to the Wicked Idea. And now I remember, she's the one that got tore apart and cut into pieces.
Yes, by like Roman Christians, you know.
Yikes.
I don't think the word was Christian at the time, but it was I think it wasn't religious. It was more political. It was just, let's use religion as an excuse. Let's say she's a witch or whatever as an excuse, but really it was a political thing. They just didn't want her around. She had too many ideas. A woman thinking, burn her and tear her apart and kill her and quarter her, you know, pretty much is what it was a political thing. And a lot of things that we'd see as like religious persecution were really just political battles, just under the guise of religious zealousness or zealotry, and that was kind of the excuse used for it. You know, oh, they're so religious, like zealot.
It kind of plays into what we were talking about earlier, that women were looked as sort of pagan, because according to the legend, she was at a former pagan temple too. She was dragged out of, and then they really did a number on her. You can read the gory bits on the. It was
the changing of the guard. You had the old Roman paganism, the Platonism that she was kind of a part of, and then you had the Neoplatonists too, and which is, you know, more onward. And then you had the changing of the guard with Constantine. Of, you know, again, this is 300 to 400 AD. You have more of the what you would call Christianity today, more of the Roman Catholic Church, or well, before it split into Roman and Byzantine, coming into power, and they didn't want this. And she was very intelligent, and she did have a lot to say politically as well, and people listened to her because they liked her. So she was kind
a bad
of
bitch.
Yeah, pretty much.
Britney, bitch.
pretty much. So they got rid of her. But how religious it was, I don't know how it was. I think it was more political.
Yeah, it says here it was
power.
It was more politically driven than anything. So it says here presents Hypatia's murder as entirely politically motivated and makes no mention of any role that Hypatia's paganism might have played in her death. But yeah, I did read about this, and I remember this one in particular because she was like chopped up into pieces and dragged.
That's what they did back then when they didn't like you politically. Instead of making a bad ad about you, they just chopped you into pieces.
Yikes.
Like Braveheart guy. William Wallace. Freedom. That's what you did. You know, you had to make a statement back then.
Yeah.
If you go against us, we won't just chop up your head. We'll draw and quarter you, which is horrible.
Quality.
You know, so
who do you have?
People are like, I want to go back to the old days. I'm like, I don't want to go back to the old days. I'm okay in today. It's cool. I'm chill with it.
Do you have anybody else after our?
Then I have Sforza, late 1400s to 1500s. Caterina Sforza, who was married to Giovanni de Medici. I don't know how people ever want to pronounce Medici.
Yeah,
or, you know,
Medici's
Italian.
fine.
I'm not good at it. Don't even get me to the French names later on because I'll butcher them.
That's all good. So yeah,
but she's a whole thing. I don't know if there are documentaries on her, but her alchemical work, but then like her whole political life was just interesting to me.
Yes, and there's that famous quote by her where they're threatening her children. She goes, "That's fine. You can kill them. I'll make some more." Like, so she was like very, again, she was at the forefront of not only the Medicis, but the Sforza family is an interesting one too, because I did something on this a little while ago where the Sforza family, they were the ones that they funded the first, or not funded, but I
They were
guess,
definitely patrons of the arts and the sciences in the
I forget
Medici's, of
I
course.
forget what term to use, but anyways, they had made the first tarot deck. So the oldest
Yeah.
tarot deck is attributed to the Sforza family, and their family members they have been immortalized in the tarot deck, right? So and there's a conspiracy because the devil card is missing. So they said the devil card is missing because either it could have been taken and worshipped as some sort of relic, or they took it out because it was, right, they didn't want the bad luck or something about it. So there's like a conspiracy behind where the devil card went. So if you buy a copy of the deck, you're buying a copy with a substituted card for the devil. So they had to come up with a devil card. So that's very interesting. I did a whole thing on that and how that is linked to Milan, right? And the whole serpent either birthing the man from the mouth or swallowing the man, and how that's linked to CERN. I linked all that to CERN and Crowley. So there's like a whole, because the Visconti and everybody's mixed in there as well. So again, very interesting connection. I believe it was Visconti and Sforza. Visconti's Sforza tarot deck. Yeah, so Visconti's Sforza tarot deck. Morgan, created by Bonifacio Bembo for the Visconti Sforza family. Let me pull this up here real quick.
We just talk about how fancy those names sound for real, like Biscotti.
Yeah. Let me pull this up here real quick. So it's one of the oldest surviving tarot
Visconti,
cards.
sorry, not biscotti. I was thinking about biscuits. I was getting hungry. So this is the original, because I don't know a lot about the tarot. I mean, I know a bit, but not too much history of it. But that's so interesting.
I wonder what family member this was.
They have no photographic kind of evidence of it existing, or that there is a written record that it existed, but it's missing, is what you're saying?
Well, so if you're to follow that, right, it is a tarot deck, you would think it would have the devil. I mean, that's one of the cards that would be in there anyways. And it's missing. Either, again, they stole, of course it's at Yale. Yale University has all the cool stuff. I was going to say
it's at Yale. Of course it's, I was going to say, I think I know where the devil card is. It's probably in some really
in a
rich
somewhere.
Dude's private collection. Some rich guy's private collection, maybe. He's holding on to it.
Yeah.
That's where all the Picassos are. They're not in the museum. They're in somebody's private collection. But yeah, now it's at Yale. So that's a whole other situation. So everything's at Yale, though.
So you have, right, the Duke of Milan. Look at their crescent there, the red man. That's what's on the Alfa Romeo, or Romeo, however you say it, because I get emails about that too. The Alfa Romeo logo is part of this because they were from Milan. So again, they're tied into a lot of things. And Caterina Sforza, she was one of the first women to come up with recipes for skincare. There was for fertility, for what else is where there was makeup. There was a whole bunch of different things, and she was really at the forefront of that movement. So essentially,
that's her book, her manuscript, Gli Esperimenti.
Yes,
Gli Esperimenti. I can't pronounce Italian, but 454 recipes, cosmetic, medicinal, alchemical. So there are some alchemical recipes, and I don't know if I couldn't find a copy of it. I don't know if we have an extant copy or if it's just like a writing about she wrote this book. There probably is an extant copy, but I didn't get around to finding that one.
According to the lore, I think it was copied after the fact by one of her followers, I think it was, from her handwritten manuscript. So it was supposedly copied from a handwritten manuscript that belonged to her. Again, that's just how.
So we do actually have. Yeah, I'm looking here. We do have a translation of it.
Yes.
So there is a copy of it. That's some books. I actually did a whole study on this in one of my honors writing classes recently, and it was a study on the books that we have that are written about. Like, this guy wrote a book, and it was about this, like a really small review. But then we don't have the book anymore. The book's gone. And we don't know if we'll ever have it. Yeah. So sometimes there are these books. It's like, oh, this person wrote a book. We don't have the book, though. And it's like, what was in that book? It makes you wonder, But I'll have to find this. I don't think I could. I think I couldn't find a PDF of it, and I didn't want to buy it yet. But I will buy it because I spend way too much money on books. But I do have a book called maybe I'll run to my bookshelf in a moment and get it. A book called The Lady's Handbook. It's from the 1800s. These are really big deals. Like, it's got all kinds of recipes for cosmetics, how to make yourself look prettier. There's some interesting recipes in it. One is like how to get rid of bed bugs in your bed, and it says sprinkle quicksilver or mercury on your bed and then sleep on it. I don't think I'll do that, but it's what people, were doing at the time. But it did say there were alchemical recipes in there. So there were cosmetic, medicinal, but then alchemical. And that kind of got me interested. Like, well, what do you mean by alchemical recipes? What are we talking about?
I have some here: to make the hair grow, to make the hair blonde like gold, to make the hair blonde and like gold, to make hair drop out and never come back, to make the face white, beautiful, and colorful, water to make the face white, beautiful, shining, and colorful, against redness of the face caused by the sun and cracking, to bronze skin, to make beautiful, water to make beautiful, to make the hands white and beautiful like ivory, to make the hands and face white, to make the breast small and firm. I don't know how you would do that. Rouge very light and most excellent, to make the teeth white and shiny, to make the teeth clear, shiny, and beautiful, to have fragrant breath, to make pleasant the odor of the mouth and breath, so like mouthwash, celestial water which makes a person younger and turns the dead into living. Okay, that went 0 to 100 real quick. Like, here's necromancy.
I need some of that stuff right there. I need some of that stuff there because some mornings I wake up and I could take some of that celestial water.
Yeah.
And I just don't see anything like what was in it is what's interesting because, I have a couple old books that I got and they're old. I mean, old books. And they're about, whitening because people love to be really fair. It was, a sign of nobility. And it has like lead in it. It's some bad stuff that people were putting on their skin back then. So I'm always like, I wonder what she was using. I'm kind of reading a bit here. I'm just clicking around the interwebs and I see, a lot of it used herbs and which is nice. They're not filled with lead and, mercury and whatever else people were putting.
Yeah, which they were using definitely a lot back then. They're just like, here, just drink this.
Cinnabar, I think.
Drink this mercury, it'll make you live longer. And it's like, all right. And then their freaking hair and teeth fall out. And it's like, why am I? It's like, well,
what's it like the people drinking the radium water now, man? I'm okay. I'm not. I'm good. I'll just drink my tea from Macca's. Take my chances.
There was this other lady, which I didn't really. I'm gonna have to come back to this lady because this lady's a lot more interesting. So we have Christina of Sweden and the Porta Magica. So she's linked to like the Rosicrucians and this other thing that I'm going to be covering soon, the Porta Magica, the alchemical door in Rome. So I'm going to save this one, but she was also in there. And so we have Caterina, and I wanted to focus right towards the end. I wanted to focus on Mary Anne Atwood. I don't know if we've jumped around a little bit, but Mary Anne Atwood is really what some consider so you have Principe and Newman, which are like Mac Daddies in alchemy, considered a suggestive inquiry into the Hermetic arts, I believe is the name of the book, to be one of the 3 books which started the influence of spiritual interpretation of alchemy in early modern Europe. So she had a more of a spiritual look on alchemy. Now, the interesting thing about Mary Anne Atwood, this was the 19th century, early 20th century. There's not a lot about her, like if you look up her Wikipedia, but according to the story, her father was, again, they were I forget which church they were a part. So I think they were Anglican. Anyway, I could be getting that wrong, but her and her father, Thomas South, right? Apparently this guy was into mesmerism, which we'll get into, and he had this whole occult library. And when she was young, she would read the books with her dad, right? Her father, Thomas South, and she grew up with this library. She had read it, and allegedly after she had died, it was donated to the Theosophical Society. So that might tell you a lot of what was in the library. But they grew up, and she was allegedly a regular woman, feminine, beautiful, all these things. And when they were growing up, her and her father had agreed to write a book or whatever. And so she picked, right, it was supposed to be on Alchemy, and whatever. She had no prior experience. She wasn't a scholar. She wasn't a mystic. She wasn't like anybody who you would have thought like, hey, you know, this lady's like a Helena Blavatsky or like a Mary the Jewess or whatever it was, like a super overly occult and mystical person, and neither was her father. But according to the lore, they were in separate parts of the house. They both had the same source material. Her father wrote a poem which was never published, and she ended up writing a book. Now, they had published a book called Early Magnetism and Its Higher Relation to Humanity in 1846. That was the first book that was published under a pseudonym, and they published that first. Okay. And then the second book, A Suggestive Inquiry into the Hermetic Mystery in 1850, that was the one that was written by Atwood at her father's request and in parallel with his own composition of a lengthy poem on the same subject. And so allegedly they both wrote these works side by side. You know, they didn't talk about it. They weren't going to talk about it until after it had already been finished. Allegedly, her father never read the works, and they quickly went ahead and shot it over to the publisher for publishing. So they came up with the money. They hadn't even read it, and they went ahead and published it. And then out of nowhere, they went ahead and canceled and bought all the books back. Only a few copies survived, and a lot of them were burned. They were disposed of and burned. So how
they pulled a Kafka, essentially.
Yeah.
Tried to.
Yeah. They were like, listen, and there's a few different theories as to why that could have been. The first theory being that she had revealed too much in these works. Now, I skimmed through it, and I was able to pull various quotes. I was able to pull through it. Now, again, it's like 500 pages, and again, it's very, very deep. She goes in on alchemy at the beginning, and then she starts going into some more esoteric stuff. But I'm going to bring this up here because so we have this young Mary Ann South, right before she married her husband. So she was Mary Ann South. Had no prior experience, wasn't a mystic of any sort. Her father had this library. He was into mesmerism and the occult, I guess, but also a regular guy. They were very religious. They would go to church, etc., etc. They both decided to write this book. Her father wrote a poem, was never published. After it was published, it sold over 100 copies, and for the time, that was a lot of copies, so it was selling really well. And then something changed where they wanted to get rid of all the copies that were out there, and allegedly they did. Some survived, the originals, and then it was republished again later on with some parts omitted, but some people have checked it out, and supposedly nothing was omitted. It was all kind of the same. The only thing that was changed in some of the parts was the translations. Some of the translations were changed up, right? Grammatical errors, things of that nature were changed. And I don't know if you listened to Pink or not, but one of the few things on the Wikipedia page was like in pop culture, apparently, this is really strange. Pink in her music video, You and Your Hand, is reading, right? And look how long this music video is, 3 minutes and 33 seconds long. She was reading A Suggestive Inquiry into Hermetic Mystery, which is the book by Mary Anne Atwood, which is really weird.
Is that a part in like a video of her like holding it, reading it?
Is this part of the music video?
So like she's holding a book and reading it in the music video?
Yeah.
This is, okay, and you stopped it here?
Yeah, I stopped it here. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I would say as far as that industry goes, because I have a couple friends who live in LA and work in that, and that's not even that's the video director, and they're into the directors who, you know, the artist has no say. They're signed in these videos. They're just performing with the creative director is the one who's putting in these outfits, says the choreographer says dance this way, the creative director is doing it. The creative directors in the Hollywood and the music industry are very into the occult, and they will always pop little things in. Always have little tidbits of, you know, things like this, things that nobody would know. People would be like, what's some old book? They wouldn't even take the time to read it, you know?
Right? That's what I'm saying. So
But
it's like, that was really weird when I was
weird.
like, Pink out of all the people. So, okay, let's say it was her directors, whatever. Interesting book to have out there now. So the conspiracy goes, she had revealed secrets that were supposed to stay. So in the book, she breaks it down like, here's an exoteric view of this, and then the more esoteric view of that same thing. And I haven't read the whole thing again. I haven't read the whole thing, so I'm still working my way through it. And I'm sure
I'm looking through it here. It's very long.
Yeah, it's very long, and I'll reference it later on as the show develops, whatever. So the first theory is that she revealed too much. That she revealed knowledge that was supposed to be esoteric and occulted in some sort of society. And the other, there's another twist to that theory that the book was either, because this story reminded me of H.P. Lovecraft and how his grandfather had this occult library, and he was reading from that and taking inspiration through his dreams and through like some sort of medium kind of, things are coming through the dream realm, and it's like automatic writing.
And mesmerism and spiritualism was really big.
I'm gonna get to that because that's an interesting part of it.
1800s
and
early 1900s.
My other thing, another part of that theory was there was a group of people who actually wrote this book. So she was either it was a sort of channeled thing, which could be possible, because the depth of the book it goes very deep, and it's like if you had no prior experience in any of this stuff, you're gonna write a piece of work this deep. Either you had help, it was channeled, or it was a group of people that came together and wrote this. And when they put it out, they realized they had revealed too much, and they had to buy it back, because who's giving you the money to buy it back, right? If you're just a regular person. So the second theory is that the church didn't like what they had put out, and they didn't want their reputation tarnished, so they just bought it back. And right, it wasn't really that she had revealed anything, because you could get some sort of sensationalist view of like, embellishment of a story, like, oh, she revealed too much. Like, we in this community, it's always like, oh, if you know too much, what happens to you, right? The Clintons will
the
come
Men in Black
knocking.
came after her or something, The Men in Black came to get her.
So it's like,
but it could have been that too. That does make sense if he was, especially if he was Anglican. That and
yes.
Spiritualism was growing, but there was like 1840s up to the Civil War times. This was what was considered the missionary generation. Was she American or English?
She was French, I believe, or English.
French.
English.
Okay, English, yeah. And so Atwood, and I'm thinking, and what was the maiden name of her?
She was born in France, so she was born in Dieppe, France. I think that's how you say it. And she was Mary Ann South at first, and then she married. Who'd she married? Alban Thomas Atwood in 1859, and then they moved to.
Yeah, and around that time, spiritualism was getting big, but there was also a huge missionary Baptist movement at the same time, worldwide, and so there was a lot of. So definitely getting into spiritualism and then bringing it out from people who are associated with a church could be like a death sentence to your reputation, that you're getting into occult things, but also. It could have been reputation on both sides, reputation with the more occult societies. And I'm not saying like, the Men in Black or anything, just the occult societies of the day of the being like, no, these are things. Black. Yeah. These are the things that we're supposed to tell other people in our little meetings. And, and which I always hated occultism in that regard of when I say occultism, I mean like hiding information and thinking that only initiated people. It's a very hierarchical way of seeing truth, which I do not enjoy.
Yeah.
But I mean, some people say it's for the best, and I don't think it matters, because I think people that aren't going to understand it don't care. I mean, you could tell people aliens exist. They're like, I got bills to pay. Chick-fil-A costs twice as much as it used to. I don't care about aliens.
Yeah,
That's what people are saying.
We know aliens are real. We've been telling you guys for like the last forever.
Yeah. And so that's the thing, is that it regardless of what it is, regardless of who wrote it, it's a very interesting work, and it has a lot of interesting things to say. And I kind of, when you told me about her today, I was like, I didn't hear about her. I'm going to go in between my Excel and finance classes, like suck up as much of this as I can. And I'm like, okay, I got one paragraph in. I'm done after an
So
hour.
apparently, so again, her philosophy and her things go super deep, but what she was trying to get at was that these alchemists were actually, it was not an actual practical thing, but it was a more spiritual, philosophical work, which there you can see it from both ways. And she goes here, yet notwithstanding this and much more that they descant upon, if our modern Illuminati were but half as experienced in nature as they might be, had they one ray even of the antique intellect they deride, how different a scene would not that remote age present to them? Instead of imagining greedy dotards, I think that's how you say it, or dotards, brooding over their crucibles and uncouth alembics in vain hope of discovering the elixir and stone of philosophers, they would observe the philosophers themselves by a kindred light made visible on their own ground. Experimenting indeed, but how and with what? Not with our gross elements, our mercury, sulfurs, and our lifeless salts, but in a far different nature, with stranger arts, and with laboratories too. How different from those now in use, of common fittings, yet inferior either, but most complete with vessels, fuel furnaces, and every material requisite well adapted together and compact in one. And dude, she's going on about she's talking about all of the alchemists in history, all the ones that did transmutation. She's talking about John Dee. She's talking about Edward Kelly. She's breaking down all the history of alchemy from this very practical sort of view. And then she gets into like the more, so this is the exoteric view. And that's how she put it in on the header. She put exoteric view. And this is the very beginning of this is page 26. And she's getting deep into
she's just talking shit about everybody.
She's shitting on like these people. Like, wait a minute, you think you're better than these other alchemists, right? Like you need to both see it from the same point of view. You're both working right in conjunction with the same things, essentially, is what she's getting at. It's like one is not better than the other. And
reading that makes me really believe that it was written by her and it was written by women, because I will say, or by a woman, because women do have a great ability to bring together opposing viewpoints and find harmony within them and connections. Not all women, of course, but it is a feminine trait, I believe, this bringing of harmoniousness to a situation. And probably why now like 53% of corporate CEOs are women, because women make really good CEOs. Actually, they're really good at bringing a corporate culture together. So, and I love how she's saying that that really is my view of alchemy, that most people in the mainstream see alchemy as dumb chemistry. It's just people trying to do chemistry and they didn't understand chemistry. Yeah. But it's seen as like they were doing their best with what they had, but you're really missing the point of alchemy if you don't look at the fact that it was a philosophy and a spiritual practice. Yeah. It was very deeply spiritual if it was being taken seriously. And when you go back even to like ancient Egypt, you have people mixing things, oils and whatnot, but they have whole incantations and magical spells around like making certain things. And so that is a really interesting like point that she's kind of bringing that back in that period of the 1800s, kind of going. And of course, this is around the time when the Rosetta Stone's being discovered. We're learning more about ancient Egypt again. We're getting back a lot of this lost knowledge. So people did start to take on that understanding that, wait, there's a lot more to this than we thought there was. There's a lot more to this than just big, cool pyramid.
She talks about the ancient Egyptians and these ancient mystery schools were actually these, again, trying to purify the soul. And there were they were conducting spiritual alchemy. Again, she goes so, when I got through like the first, I think 100 pages, and then I had to skip around because I'm like, I'm not going to be able to like get any quotes or anything. I was only able to get a couple. And then this is where I mentioned earlier about the light, because she gets into, and I think, let's say that she did reveal too much and that she revealed secrets that were or above her pay grade, and a group of people were upset, whatever. I think it was near where she starts talking about, so she links mesmerism with the alchemy and the light aspect of it. And this part here is, but the best effects of mesmerism, if we connect it with the ancient sacred art, appears as trifles in comparison. The supreme wisdom they investigated, the self-knowledge and the perfection of life and immortality promised and said to be bestowed on those initiated in the higher mysteries. So she's talking about the Eleusinian mysteries and how they were actually, again, doing this sort of spiritual alchemy in these schools. She talks about Pythagoras. She talks about the interpretation of the books of Genesis as being like this sort of alchemical text, which is super interesting to me. She's going, again, very hard in the paint for somebody who had no prior experience to any of this stuff. And when she links the mesmerism stuff, that's where it gets interesting, because mesmerism, again, it's like this sort of life force. And she starts to compare the Platonists who essentially brought forth theurgy and the theurgical arts, right, of asking for help from up above. So a divine intervention of these forces from up above to intervene with our material world. That's what theurgy is essentially, right? And that's what Christians are. You're praying for an intervention of God or whatever angel, whatever force above to come and help you in this world. And mesmerism is kind of sort of like that. It's like a spirit in all things, like this life force that animates all things. So she's on shaky ground, in my opinion. And that idea paired with the early magnetism, I think magnetism is also one of these occult secrets and one of these things. And the reason I say that is because I did an episode on this book called A Voyage to the World of Cartesius. And it's a book from 1694. And it's a book it's a story, quote unquote, a fictional story about Descartes and how he had to figure it out how to project his consciousness into outer space, et cetera, et cetera. But in this book, they're talking about the protagonist, the main guy in the story, is being taken through these other dimensions and outer space and other planets and other realms. And this character, Descartes, is forming and unforming galaxies in front of him and making entire dimensions in front of him alchemically and showing him all these secrets, everything, like this crazy mind-blowing story. And it's breaking down like these physics and the science and all this stuff. And there's one thing that stood out to me in that entire, well, two things really, but another thing aside from that first thing that stood out to me in that story. And it was that the character that's showing him all this craziness, like how to create a galaxy and how to create a universe and how to create a reality here. He tells him one thing. He goes, there's one thing I can't reveal to you. And that's the secrets of magnetism. Because if I was to reveal the secrets of magnetism to you, it would quite literally drive you insane. You would lose your entire mind and you would dissolve out of reality, essentially, if I was to reveal to you the secrets of magnetism. So that's why when I first stumbled across this lady who was like, not a nobody, but a person who wouldn't seem like she was well-versed in these occult arts, her first book was about magnets. Again, I only skimmed through. I didn't read the whole thing. It's only 146 pages, I think, the first book. And then paired with this one, and then she's weaving mesmerism in with it, which is, again, kind of magnetic, right? This force that animates reality, animals, all these different things. I think she was hitting the nail on the head, and I think
I got some goosebumps there when you was talking about that story. I was like, "Woo, that's pretty interesting." Because it is. Yeah. I mean, there is a lot to it, and definitely. And I'm not, versed in a lot of scientific hardware, but magnets, so superconductors and things like that, are very important. And
well, one thing, Yiskah, I've read grimoires from the 9th century that speak about the magnet being the preferred stone of the magician. So what does CERN have? A large array of magnets. What are they trying? They're trying to open up portals to other dimensions. Well, you're linking magnets with occultism. together, you know? And it says it in this book, like to create a homunculus, you need a magnet. So is that to attract like a soul? Like what's going on? I mean, there's magnets and a lot of things that we use. Is there magnets in our phones? I think there's pretty sure there's magnets on our phone, but
there's magnets in that. I have this like remarkable tablet. It's got like a magnet.
I have a remarkable
like
too. We're remarkable buddies.
Me too, yeah. I got the typing one. It's like so bougie, but I bought like I spent all the money on it. I was like, I need everything. I'm an all-in person. If I'm gonna get it, I just want the whole package. But it's funny that you said that because, CERN's obvious, it's like a real thing. There's this whole internet phenomena thing. It's an internet pop culture thing called the back rooms.
Yes.
It's like you need to do the damn episode on the back. I love lore. I love video games. Like I still play Morrowind to this day. Just love like any kind of lore and storytelling. And in the back rooms kind of, he got it from CERN and ideas like that because the thing that kind of opens up into this otherworldly, like strange, like I don't know, almost like machine learning generate, like it's like something like Mid-Journey tries to create the universe and it turns out horribly wrong. It's called the low proximity magnetic distortion system. That's what they call it in the lore. Yeah. So it's like magnets, and we kind of think of it as like it's kind of like the sci-fi, like when they use quantum. Like, we don't explain how this would work in our stories, quantum, but they are used in a lot of hardware and anything like that. CERN, a lot of, again, I'm not an engineer, but as I know, gold and magnets are very important in our technological infrastructure and how we use them, like superconducting and like, yes. Cooling systems and things that are really important for huge databases. And again, I'm not an engineer, so I can't speak on it that well, but I do know that they're important, and I do know that there's a lot to them. And when you get into spiritually, of course you have like your hippie kind of like wear this magnet thing on your arm to help your arthritis. I use it on my knees sometimes. I don't know if it works or not, but if I believe it does, maybe I can make it work.
Well, but so Mary Ann talked about how belief was very important, and like belief was really at the core of any of this stuff. If you believe it, therefore it's true. So, and that's
the thing about the holographic universe, the projection. Like this is all a projection, and it's a product of mind. If you believe in the product, mind kind of being this essence that all things have some kind of level of consciousness. We know the placebo effect exists. We know it does. It's documented that people can believe they're taking chemotherapy drugs and their cancer gets cured. And it's just funny to me. They're like, well, it didn't do any better than placebo, but the placebo worked. And I'm like, why is anybody studying that? The fact that somebody could will away their cancer if they believed enough. That's interesting. That's what we should be studying, not the drug, but it doesn't make any money. Not saying that I believe you could do that per se. I don't know. I think it would take a lot of belief to heal yourself with belief. And a lot of people try to do it and they, sadly pass away. Because they maybe didn't get the help they needed.
I believe it's possible in certain.
I think it's hard. It's difficult.
Yeah.
I think it's difficult. I think anything's possible, but to get past what you physically see, what is that movie? I don't watch a lot of movies. The Matrix, and he bends the spoon or whatever, right? Like I've never even seen the whole thing. I've just
there
seen
is no spoon.
That's the thing, right? Well, there is a spoon, but it's the reality of it is more like there is a pen, but it's just a projection of atoms.
Yeah.
And it's funny that you're talking about Descartes because Cartesian plane, and I was like, he must have got off the Cartesian plane, man. Also, that story sounds a lot like the story in the Book of Enoch, where Enoch is taken and sees like the realm and sees Watchers, galaxies and shit like that.
Yep. And then what happens to him at the end of it? He turns into Metatron. So I think that's what they
lifted up. He's like he just like he ascends like off the Cartesian plane, off the 3D. He goes out into the 5D. I don't know. That's somebody else I don't know what to say. I used to live in Arizona. He went into the 5D realm, man.
Yeah, and I think that's what they're trying to occult from us, like these hidden teachings that are occulted in these stories. And at the end of it all, after Enoch is being taught by the Watchers, and the Watchers are the ones who are watching the divine alchemist at work transmute and create reality. After he learns those secrets, he becomes the lesser Yahweh, the Metatron, right? The little Yahweh and sits at the, at the throne at the bottom. So it's like, that's the story of alchemy, essentially, where you dissolve out of this dimension and you step outside of it in order to be able to control it from the outside of space and time. So again, I think that's why it was taken out of the canon too. I mean, and I'm talking about 3 Enoch at the end where he becomes this angel, but even the first of Enoch is, supposedly non-canon, right? To at least my canon. In Ethiopia, it is canon. But I think that's why it's occulted, because it's too weird. It's too woo-woo. It's too spectacular, and they don't want you to be like, hey, wait a minute.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's too crazy.
When you're talking about, like, I started laughing because I was thinking about that. I don't know why. I started thinking about that movie Altered States, where he, like, turns into
into a monkey or something like that, like an ape.
He turns into a monkey, and then he turns into, like, an embryo, and then he turns into, like, a primordial soup, which is just the idea that life came from some... It's ridiculous, but it was very strange. It kind of reminded me of that idea. But I mean, really, at the end of it, though, what's so interesting is that a lot of these, what you get, the male alchemist, you get a lot of experiments, you get a lot of awesome things going throughout history. And there was one woman that I did write down that we didn't talk about, but I thought she was really interesting, was a woman named... Well, there are 2. Okay, so there was Marie de Gournay. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right because I don't know. I think she's French. She wrote a book called The Equality of Men and Women and a book called The Lady's Grievance. And she was really big writing about, like, women don't have enough education. She wanted women to be educated. And it's kind of like almost Virginia Woolf writing later, saying that what women need is a room of their own and a paycheck, so that they can do things that men do. They don't have their own space to write in, and they don't have a paycheck, so they can't have any time to write. They're too busy keeping the house or going out and working, because this whole idea that women just stayed at home and swept floors and took care of babies is hilarious. The majority of women were out working to survive, and their children were also working. And then the women that were of means, at least in the Victorian era, were not spending time with their children. It was seen as unheard of that you had a nanny and she spent time with your children, and you sat around and you entertained and you did needlework, and you weren't to speak to your children really at all, and you would pamper them too much. So this whole idea that, like, there's some traditional woman is okay. Like, it's just really funny to me. But she had an interest in alchemy. Again, this is the 15 to 1600s, which was seen as not good for women. Women are too passionate and they'll get too into it or whatever. Then you have a woman named, and I went a little bit further here, the 1600s. 1600s. Marie Murdrock. And I cannot pronounce French again, so sorry, French names. She was a chemist and an alchemist. She wrote a book called Easy Chemistry for Women. And it was the first real work of chemistry, what we know today as chemistry, the actual science of chemistry. It's assumed by most scholars to be the first work on chemistry / alchemy by a woman since the 3rd century AD. Not a recipe book, but an actual scientific manuscript of this is what I did, these are the experiments I did, this is how I did it. And she had the belief in the quotation that, like, minds have no sex. And she was self-taught. Her book contains a table of weights and 106 alchemical symbols. And the interesting thing is that she had access to special high temperature furnace that required permission from the king to use. Mm-hmm. So she was seen as, like, the king had to give you permission to use this furnace. There's a lot of argument. Is her book alchemy? Is it chemistry? People say it's a little bit of both. It's kind of proto-chemistry. But she was one of the first writers of her time, male or female, to actually invite collaboration and scrutiny of her work. So peer review, to say, come look at it. So the men, she was the first woman to do really what the men had been doing for a long time. What the women were doing and wasn't being recorded, because obviously they may have been doing it. They were either witches or just in their spare time if they had the money, but they were too busy with all the other things. They were so busy with all the other things. If you're a lady of the estate, you what time do you have? It's a big job to take care of an estate and to manage all these servants and whatnot. It really was a full-time job for these women. And of course, like, having children, like, every year, like popping out 12 babies that don't survive past the age of 3 or 5. what women, it seems, were doing is more of what Atwood was doing, which is the spiritual understanding of alchemy, the spiritual understanding of the deeper art underneath it. While of course, the experimentation is important. Chemistry itself is important. I study chemistry. My daughter wants to be a chemist. Like, she watches 3-hour-long YouTube videos. Like, I find them insanely boring, of people doing not just like, baking soda, but actual chemistry videos. She watches them. She's like 9. I'm like, you might blow my mind. She blows my mind. And that exists, and that has a place, and experimentation has a place. It brings us a lot of great things. But what is missing out of the modern picture is the spiritual understanding of reality. And that's what I feel the women brought. And they brought in that understanding of the spiritual mystery behind it. So Atwood really, I feel like this is kind of her magnum opus. And I don't know if she wrote anything about women in general, but you can definitely see
that, and that's it. There was nothing else. She didn't write anything else. And
you can see in what she wrote is like, it's a very feminine point of view. So it'd be strange to me if, I think she did write it, because again, she might not have had experience, but she had a library full of books, and knowledge is key. So she had all this time to read. She was educated enough to read, and she was able to write this. And I think it attests to the fact that while experimentation is important, what's more important is the mindset you approach it with. Because the problem in experimentation is when people go into an experiment wanting to prove their idea right instead of being open to the results of the experiment. So if you can approach things in this work in alchemy or chemistry or anything you do with a mindset of really wanting to understand it at a deep fundamental level, and that has to get spiritual at some point, because once you get materialism, it's just, I think it was Neil deGrasse Tyson who said scientists don't ask why, they ask how. And I was like, that's a really cheap, sad view of science. Because I think a true scientist wants to know why as well. And all of the ancient scientists were also philosophers. And that's probably why science today is garbage, just because they're not trained in philosophy. Is that if you could understand, it's going into the why, but being open to the answer. I think that's a beautiful thing that I see more of, and that we need more of in today for anything, any subject.
Yeah, and I think that's a beautiful spot to end it on. I think what we should do is, I think we should pick apart more of this book, the I forgot the name of it already, Anne Atwood's book, A Suggestive Inquiry in the Hermetic Mysteries. And we should read more. I've already read I read chapter 1, and then I jumped around to some other parts, but we should read some of it and then compile some information and do an episode on that, because I think there's a lot.
Give me 3 months. Give me 3 months after exams, and I finish, once I get this Excel stuff down. Yeah. But no, we should. I kind of perused it, and I'm like, I'm going to sit down and read this weekend for sure, because
it's heavy.
I'm really interested.
It's
great,
really
though.
heavy.
It's
really heavy, but I think, like I said, once you get a chance, read it, and then we'll reconvene and break it down for the people that want to know what's in the book, because it's very interesting. But yeah, Yiskah, this was fun. I enjoyed talking about women in alchemy, and I'm sure on the next episode maybe we can talk about Tycho Brahe's sister and some other alchemists that we didn't talk about, and I'll bring up the one with the Porta Alchemica, the alchemical door in Rome, which I didn't know there was a woman involved. But yeah, that's
there's always a woman involved. You just don't hear about her. That's the thing. I mean, not always, but you just don't hear about her. But I've enjoyed this very much, and I really appreciate you having me on to talk about this, because again, it's not just the historical it's not just, there were women alchemists, women, there were women. It really is an important present day conversation to have. It's a good way, in a manageable, central, centricized, I don't want to say non-binary, I was going to go that way, but a non-extremist way to talk about the fact that women do have a place in these things. Yes. And we're not going too far into either camp, that you kind of see the polarization. That's what I was going for. It's not as polarized. I want to have a even talk about it, but we do have to accept that it wasn't always good.
No,
Both
absolutely.
and
Yeah, we can. I'll bring up my notes of the black mass and all that stuff on the next one that we do. But you want to plug your stuff for the people where they can find you if they're interested.
Come follow me on Instagram. If you look up my name, you'll find me. YISYVONNE is my Instagram. Come have a conversation with me if you're interested in stuff. I usually reply, and I love talking to people. I talk to people all the time. I have random people like Instagram message me, call me up on my Instagram. I end up talking to people for like 3 hours. So if anybody's interested in these things, anything, especially again about, I don't say feminism, but women in history and that kind of place of that spiritually, definitely give me a hit up. And things are coming once things calm down on my front in terms of like studies. So there'll be blog posts and whatnot and one day videos when I have the time.
I'll post the links.
Thank you so much, Juan.
In the description. As always, everyone, make sure to follow the show on social media at the Juan on Juan Podcast, TJOJP.com. For those that want more of the show, patreon.com/the Juan on Juan Podcast. Appreciate everyone for being here with us today. And as always, catch you on the next one. Bye-bye now.